And then the next few weeks here, we do this every once in a while. We're kind of take some time to catch up and hear a little bit about what God has been doing, how he's been working. And this is actually a habit of the church. If you look in the book of Acts, it would have been pretty typical for the church every once in a while to stop and kind of get caught up and report on what is happening, on what God is doing, how he's moving through groups of people, how he's changing lives. And we want to take a little time to get you caught up that way. And it's just really, really important for that to happen. And what we're going to be doing here, especially in this service, is looking back and kind of celebrating what God has done and kind of seeing ourselves back in the story of how God has moved here over the last few years. Next weekend, we're going to talk about kind of some things that we're going to open up, new pieces of vision we're going to open up here in the near future. And so very short 2-week little kind of mini series. Today, if you're here and you're maybe a guest or just jumping in, you're going to really get caught up on what Grace is all about, where we've been, kind of what makes us tick in some ways, and you'll see some of that in the history. Some of us have been around a long time, and I think this will be very refreshing and helpful. In a lot of ways, what we're going to do in this time is we're going to practice Scripture as much as we're going to learn Scripture, right? It probably even more so. Here's what I mean by that. The psalmist would say this. It says, I'll remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I'll remember your miracles of long ago. I will consider all your works and meditate on your mighty deeds. This is the habit of God's people. Every once in a while to stop and look back. And as we look back at what God's done, it does a few things. One is it causes us to give praise to God for how he's worked and how he's changed and moved and answered prayers. What it also does is as we look back and see and get perspective on how much God has moved and how he's worked, it also gives us courage to move forward, right? When we see the mountains kind of ahead of us, they shrink a little bit in our hearts and minds because we know, man, those mountains back here looked big, so it helps us to understand how we can move forward. And so that's what we're going to spend a little time doing today is kind of looking back at how God has moved and how he's worked. And let me walk you through the story a bit. So 2 years ago, the group of people, which was quite a bit smaller, our family was smaller than it is today. We were at a bit of a crossroads, and we had to figure out how do we want to move forward. And so what we did in November of 2022, literally like 2 years ago to this month, we looked and we said, what we're going to do is we invited kind of everybody to take the journey, and we called that journey Here to There. We called it Here to There. And we said what Here to There is going to be is our response to what God has already done. Because God, at that point, had already done a lot, right? And if you're brand new with us, I'll just give you just a very short background on what happened. God, at that point, we had come through COVID. We had joined with another church. They gave us their building, and they joined us, about 20 people. We renovated that building. We were outgrowing that building, and we were kind of like, what are we going to do next, right? And right about that time, another church, this church that was here, came and approached us and said, hey, we actually want to join you guys too. We don't really have a path forward. How about we give you our building and we'll join you and we'll kind of become one family together, and can that all happen? And we looked at each other and kind of the long and short of it is we all said, yeah, we're in on that. Let's do it. So we were about 1.5 miles down the road at the time in this little renovated horse barn that was awesome. And we were all kind of packed in there, and we looked at each other and said, hey, are you guys up for this? Right? This church wants to join us. They want to give us this building. We're going to have to move. We're going to have to raise some finances. We're going to have to take some risks. Are you in on this or not? Right? And it was a little bit of a moment for us to decide, are we up for the challenge of moving into a new chapter, a new phase in the life of our church? And so what we said is, here's going to be our response to the work that God has already supernaturally done. He already provided us with a new space. We were asking God for that. He took care of all of it. And we said, here would be our faithful response, is to look at what God has done. And what we want to do is maximize. We want to use it faithfully. We want to use it to reach the community and be a light to the community. and we want to impact in all kinds of ways. And we laid out how we saw that happening, right? And there were three big pieces to how that played out, and here's what they were. We said first, community impact. We said, okay, if we're going to jump into this new building, we need to renovate. Kind of every space that you see has been touched and impacted and changed over the course of here to there. We said, if we're going to move from here to there, we got to change some space, and we want to make this space feel like home to our community. So that when somebody walks in here, they walk in and feel like, man, I feel welcomed. I feel excited to be here. I don't feel intimidated or overwhelmed. I feel like that this group of people thought of me as they thought through the decisions of the building. We said we want to make a community impact by first the building and making it a home that's welcoming, and then we want to look beyond that. We want to live in such a way and love in such a way that if you took Grace Church out of this area, that the community would be like, oh, we feel that, right? We want there to be a hope and a help available to widows and orphans and single moms and all kinds of people, kids and students in our area, so that there would be a vacuum if we got pulled out of here, right? It mattered. So we invested in all kinds of ways. We'll talk about some of that. We also talked about discipleship, right? The next piece of that. We said we don't want to just do stuff and make an impact in our community without it coming from the heart, without it coming from within. We said we don't want to just be people that do good things. We want to be the real deal. We want to be people that are impacted by Jesus personally, and as he changes us, that overflows into how we love people, right? So we said we're going to be committed to real discipleship. We want to follow Jesus ourselves. We want to help other people to be followers of Jesus as well. And then finally, the third one was next generation. We said if we're going to do this, we have to prioritize, when we think about the building, when we think about this move, we have to prioritize the next generation. We're going to think about kids and students. We're going to use spaces, and we're going to think about our money and our priorities. We're going to put that resource into children, to kids and students, and make sure that they get kind of our first and best investment as we reach into the next generation, and even as we reach into young adults and raising up new leaders. So those were the three big pieces that we introduced. And we introduced that to the group there at George Washington, and a bunch of you said, Ryan, we're in, right? You prayed, you thought, you decided, and you said, we're in. And what being in meant was you said, we're in to participate. We'll personally be a part of this. We're in to grow. And right, this is one of the things I looked at the group there, that if you were around, you remember this, and I would look at you and say the same thing. I said, if you're going to be here at Grace, you have to be committed to grow, because we're going to continue to be a people on a journey. We're not going to get stagnant. We're not going to get stuck. We're going to continue to press towards growth. That's who we are, right? And you said, I'm in on that. And then there was a financial goal. That small group of people committed, and it said over 3 years, we'll give $700,000 to invest into this building, to hire some new staff, and to make an impact in the community, right? Big deal. A bunch of us, if you remember, if you were around then, we use these little paint swaths to commit, and there's prayers written on the back of these, and that small group of people, right, represented here by the families, individuals that committed, all those people said, hey, we're in. And so if you're out in the lobby and you're wondering why there's random paint swaths on the door or on the wall, that's why, right? That's actually a representation of real people that made a heart commitment and said, hey, we're in to go from here to there. That's what that little picture there represents, right? So we said we're in, we made the decision, and then what that did is that triggered the go button. And then from there, volunteers started to go ballistic on this building. There are literally thousands of hours, it's not an exaggeration, of people investing volunteer time to make this building be a place where our kids can safely learn about Jesus in a way that feels up to date and up to speed. And what you'll find is that if you look back on the story, is everything we could do from a volunteer perspective, we did. from painting to carpet to some pieces of drywall, the renovation of our offices, you name it. There were people here that were here constantly. Sometimes I saw people here and I was like, did you sleep in a cot downstairs? Like how have you been here so much? Literally every day, people were doing things in the building. And right around this time last year, it was crunch time. It was crunch time. A handful of you remember, you're smiling and kind of have PTSD, right? You're like, I remember that, and it was insane, and it was kind of fun, and nobody slept, and some people got sick, right? So we were all in just to make it happen and get over the goal line. And we got our permit, and then 5 days later, we moved in. And it was a week before Christmas. Great plan, right? It was amazing. Like, it was amazing how God made it all play out. And people gave time, they gave financial resources, and all of God's people just kind of jumped into it here in a powerful way. What you may not know is that underneath all the drywall and underneath all the flooring, there are prayers of God's people for this church and for this community, and right for how God will use all of this. So right, you don't see them; they're buried now. Right, they're covered up by drywall and carpet and flooring out there. But there are people prayed and wrote prayers on all of those surfaces before we covered them up. In fact, some of you, your names may be on here. You may have been prayed for. Who knows? Children being reached, leaders being raised up, marriages being saved, people coming out of addiction. All of this are prayers that are examples that were written on all of these surfaces before we covered them up. So even as you walk through the halls, the prayers of God's people are all surrounding and underneath all of that work. This was the journey that we've been on here in just the last little bit. Now, as we prepared the building, got it all ready, eventually we got to the part where we could say, okay, we're ready to move in. And then we had the biggest move party I think I've ever heard of. 300 people-ish moved us from one location to the next. It was absolutely insane. It was crazy, right? Everybody showed up and they said, hey, we pulled all the chairs out of the old sanctuary. Right, this is our old building, if you never saw it. I'm just curious, how many of you guys have come to Grace since we moved into this building? You're like, I never was in the horse barn thing. You guys, raise your hand, right? You can look around. That's pretty fun. That's awesome, right? Lots of you have just jumped in here in the last little bit. The group of us that all were part of that move, we looked and said, okay, we're going to move the entirety of the church in a weekend. It was a blast, and it all happened super, super fast, right? You guys would remember some of that as we dove in together, gave some time, and kind of moved the whole church. What has happened since then, right? We moved in, and the first thing we said on the first weekend, kind of semi-exhausted, is the first statement we made is this. So the building that we're moving into, it isn't a trophy, it's a tool. It isn't a trophy, it's a tool. This building has never been the point. It's not the point to have a nice property. We're grateful for it. We said this building is going to be a tool, and that tool immediately was put into use. And a huge piece of where you see this starting to show up are things like baptisms. We began to see lives change through baptism almost immediately within the first month or so. I looked back on some of these stats, and what I found is in our last service in the last building, we were celebrating, and it was worth celebrating, that at that point, over the last 2.5 years, about 36 people were baptized. It was incredible. We were so fired up about that, right? In about a 2.5-year window, 36 people had made their faith public. Since we've been here, it's nearly 70 people in about 11 months that have made that same decision, right? That's incredible, right? Incredible decision. Seeing God move in the hearts of people to make their faith public, powerful life change is playing out. We see that happening in the lives of students, adults, kids, you name it, all ages and stages. And one of the things that's been really fun is to watch our property be used, right, as a tool We just had Fall Bash not too long ago. About over 500 people were a part of that. And just saying, hey, community, we love you. We want to invite you to be a part of it. Oh, look at this family. They've got a whiteboard. Godly people here. Just take note, right? Right, I like that. That's really good. So, right, there's all kinds of opportunities that show up here as we get to kind of build relationships and make connections with kids and with families and say, hey, we're just like everybody else. We love you guys. And then a massive opportunity that played out here in Go and Do. Go and Do is a time when we go out and we serve those who are less mobile. We serve widows and orphans and elderly couples and single moms. And we had an opportunity this past August to do another one. We've done these multiple times. And I'll never forget looking into a widow's eyes as she teared up and said, thank you, God sent you to me. She had projects and stuff in her home she could not do on her own, she couldn't keep up with, and she felt as though this was for her. It helped her know God saw her and met her in the middle of her need and answered her prayers through God's people. Guys, I love this stuff, right? And we literally walked from the parking lot to go meet real people right here in our community, our neighborhood, right, that have real needs. And this is the kind of stuff that's happening all over the place. Encouraging single moms, helping elderly couples that don't know how to find help, and them finding hope because we're showing up and just being a part of things, moving people that need help with moving left and right. That community impact, helping in real and tangible ways, is a massive part of what we're doing. You can see something like even the renovation of the lobby, a place where I hear over and over and over again, right? I probably receive this feedback more than anybody else, is when people say to me, when I came in, I just felt at home. I felt welcomed. I felt like I could just come and be here however I show up, it's okay. And I think a huge part of that has to do with the environment and then the people that make that environment feel like a place that's accepting. It's massive. These spaces end up facilitating ministry and relationship and ultimately life change. There's another piece that has just recently come together. You guys may not even know this, but there's a whole children's wing. If you kind of go left outside of the auditorium, you're not allowed to go over there unless you have special permission, or the safety people will tase you, right? So don't do that, right? No, it's good. They kind of protect that area and make sure it's secure and safe, and our kids learn about Jesus there. Underneath that kids area, so we renovated that whole wing. Underneath that, there's an area that still, there's a bunch of classrooms down there and rooms and spaces down there. Hannah, our Power Kids director, has taken the initiative to change this space into our Grace Care Closet. So this space has all been renovated into a place where single moms, where foster care families, for those who maybe lost a home in a fire, who are in an emergency, can come and for free get clothes and resources that are needed, and that has just been made public, and man, people are freaking out, and they're so excited about it, right? The opportunity to be able to do that and to offer that to our community is a massive encouragement and help, right? Real needs being met by God's people in very real and tangible ways, all right here through this building, all through kind of our heartbeat of community impact playing out as we hoped and envisioned. The next piece that we jumped into, of course, was discipleship. Here's what we said a few years ago. We said, what we have to offer our community is Jesus. And the most effective way we can communicate who Jesus is through our own changed lives. Again, this is something that we want to continue to be committed to and come back to over and over again. It's not enough to simply do good. We have to be transformed and be changed people, right? As long as I'm your campus pastor, you're going to hear that from me. God moves through changing people, right? Not people that have arrived, people that are on a journey towards becoming more and more like Jesus. And so that's what we're committed to. And so we said we need some spaces to do that. Since we began to renovate some of these spaces. This is an example of a space that was done almost exclusively by volunteers. It was renovated and changed and morphed into this classroom environment, and you can see an example of one of our packed out classes where people are learning about the Bible. Guys, I'm just going to give you a commercial here. If you have never actually sat in one of our classes, our courses, right now, I'll just give you an example. These are happening all the time. The Life of Christ is happening right now. We have a PhD that gets paid by universities to teach the Bible. He's here teaching it for free for you and for me. Like, you can just show up anytime you want. It's literally during service times. You can go to service and then go sit in the class. Here's all you have to do. Walk down the hall and sit down, right? It's really hard. Right? Seriously, just go, and you'll be like, I cannot believe this is always available. It's incredible. There may not be much room left, but it's worth going to find a seat. And these environments where we can continue to grab hold of the Bible, learn how do I use it myself. Here's a passion for us. We don't want it just to be like you hear the Bible taught from the week, and we love that. We want you to be able to use the Bible yourself, to have the confidence to say, I can use this thing. I can open it myself. I can find Jesus in the heart of Jesus in here, and I can have a confidence utilizing the Bible on my own. Also in these spaces, we have communities. We now have, our communities have multiplied and exploded. There's 22 communities that are available where you can do the big three. We talk about the big three quite a bit around here. Here's what they are, right? I want to bless others, right? I want to be a blessing to other people. I want to think that way. How can I bless somebody else today? I want to initiate prayer. If I have a need or somebody else has a need, how do I initiate prayer in somebody else's life? And then 3, I want to get in the Bible. Bless others, initiate prayer, get in the Bible. All of our communities are centered around the big 3 and what we call living life with Jesus every day or abiding. And we said, man, all of these people, the hundreds of people that are connected now in communities and connected through classes, discipleship is happening. Lives are being changed. Forgiveness is being found. Right? Restoration and marriages are being put back together. Excitement and passion for the Bible is being unleashed. It's happening, right? This is what we're looking for. And then finally, we wanted to look at the next generation. Here's what would drive our passion, right, for the next generation. Psalm 78:4, we will not hide them from their descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power, and the wonders he has done. This call for one generation to take our faith and to communicate it to the next generation is both the privilege and the burden of every generation. Right? It's our responsibility, right? If you're an adult, even if you're a young adult, to look and say, how do we get Jesus and who Jesus is into the hands and the hearts of younger people? How do we transfer the faith from one generation to the next? And this would become a consuming passion for us here at Grace. It has driven so much of what we have been about and what we've done. And it shows up in our investment in Here to There. We said we're going to prioritize that children's wing. Right? That was when we looked at the building, that was the first thing we said. The spaces that maybe used to be offices were said, we're not going to use those for offices. We'll find some caves in the basement over here. Right? We're going to have these spaces be available for children. And we renovated those spaces and invested in them. We said, if we're going to put our resources and our energy somewhere, it's got to go towards our kids. And those, many of you know, there's been a baby tsunami here at Grace. There's just like an overwhelming number of small human beings. Some of you are part of that. I blame you. Right? There's like just pregnant people and babies everywhere, and the baby wave is growing and it's continuing to advance, which is awesome. We love that. We love that there's actually some space for babies to land in and our kids to learn about Jesus, and these spaces have been made available so that all can happen. Not to end there, of course, that there's also our students. Between our kids and students, on a weekly average, there's about 200 kids and students every week engaged in some form of access to hearing about Jesus or programming here at Grace. Massive decisions are being made. Here's some of the baby land over here. right? Here's some of our students at Momentum Youth Conference. Big decisions were made, of course, in those environments as well. Some baptisms came out of that, and we would have seen those play out here in the last few months. When we look at our kids and students, we say this is the next generation, and we know we want to continue, and we'll talk more about how our investment is going to grow and expand into young adults here in the very near future. Talk more about some of that next week. In the process of here to there, we said we have some key players that we need to pull onto the team. One of those is River Harder, doing a fantastic job with our middle schoolers, parents. Have constant communication from him, and we see a great job that River is doing as a resident here at Grace, as he's in seminary and in training and learning. And then also our Power Kids director, Hannah Schaefer, is doing a fantastic job with our kids. I just saw numbers from last week. There are 74% more children here at Grace than there was a year ago last weekend. That's incredible, right? That's incredible. I was talking to some friends in the lobby after last service, and they were saying, Ryan, we needed to hear this. You know, we need to hear this because it's funny, even though we've only been here, we haven't even been here a year yet. These are people that have been around a while. They said, what we realize is the change, even though there's rapid growth, right? The campus, of course, is growing. Our family is growing very rapidly. That's all wonderful. It's kind of week to week. And if you're not paying attention, it just can kind of feel like the normal thing, right? But when you stop and look back at it, what you start to realize is that God is moving in very, very powerful ways. If there was only a fraction of these children a few years ago, students and kids, and now there's 200, guys, that matters radically. There's a massive impact that starts to play out when you see that over some time. So we have to get above it and look at it. One of the things that we said when we introduced Here to There is this. We said we know that the world is filled with all kinds of problems, right? There's addiction issues, and there's broken families. There's plenty of people that don't know Jesus, and right, you could go on and on and on. And it can become a little bit overwhelming. Just the amount of darkness and dysfunction that exists in our culture. And here's what we said. Here's what we're going to do. Love this quote from William Watkinson. He said, instead of cursing the darkness, light a candle. Instead of cursing the darkness, light a candle. This is what we've chosen to do. What we could have done is we could have looked and said, it's overwhelming. Am I really going to be able to change anything? It's so much. Or we can start somewhere. And guys, we're just getting started, right? It's just the beginning. Haven't even been here a year. And what I could look at you and tell you, already this community would feel it if you took Grace Church away. And that is going to become exponentially more true in the next handful of years to come. We get to be a part of the solution. Guys, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. When I start to understand that being a part of what God is doing here is changing lives, changing family trees, the ripple effect is enormous. It's overwhelming. You guys, if you've been around a little while, you've probably heard me tell this story. I hope I tell it 100 more times. But there's a time in the history of our campus. About 5 years ago, I was here as the interim pastor. Okay, so the original plan was not for me to be the campus pastor here at the campus. I was just here for a little while. We were in a high school. I was just trying to provide some stability. And it was at kind of the low point of the church at that time. There was real questions about whether this church would survive. And we didn't exactly know where to go. We didn't have a long-term plan. There was no building, right? We're in a temporary space. We didn't have a leader. There was no campus pastor lined up. And so what we did is we said, well, what should we? We said we should gather God's people and pray. And so what we did is we looked and said, let's spend 100 hours praying together. And so some of us gathered early in the morning, and some people gathered at night, and some people kept track and prayed on as families or as individuals, and we spent an enormous amount of time praying together. And we asked God to do things that we did not have a human explanation on how he was going to do it. We said, God, would you give us a building? He gave us 2. Right? He gave us 2. We said, God, would you give us leadership? He gave us a whole team. It didn't happen instantly. After we spent that 100 hours, seemingly nothing happened. And then over some time, God began to answer those prayers in ways that were more than we could think, ask, or imagine. If you looked at me in 2019, when the church was about 120 people, and said, hey, in 5 years, you're going to go through multiple buildings and moves and join multiple groups of believers, and you're going to land in this beautiful facility, and the family is going to grow, and 70 people are going to be baptized in a year, and lives are going to be changed. Guys, I couldn't even imagine what this day would look like 5 years ago. What I want to make sure of is that I want to make sure that those of us who have been around a little while, that we remember that we today are sitting in the answer to the prayers of those years. We're sitting in answered prayers right now. We're watching answered prayers happen. We're watching lives change. Stuff that we wrote on a wall or a floor or begged God to do, we are sitting in the middle of it today. I don't know if you're like this. I'm like this. I usually have some piece of life that is agony to me, and I desperately cry out to God to do something about it. And then inevitably, God eventually will do something about it. And rather than stopping and praising God for what he has done and how he has answered, I find some new piece of agony to get fixated on. Right? What we want to do is we want to stop and we want to celebrate and we want to see that God is working. God is moving in powerful ways, in ways that are more than we could think, ask, or imagine. And for those of you guys who are newer to the journey with us, here's what I want you to be aware of. I want you to be aware that there's a story of sacrifice that goes way back. And the last leg of that story shows up, and there's a group of people over in Norton and Bath, and those people made sacrifices and made decisions, and those decisions allowed this campus to exist today. They sent people, and they sent money, and they believed, and they sacrificed so that this church could exist. And there's a group of people that stayed when the church was in a rough position, and they prayed like crazy, and they gave like crazy. They sacrificed their time and their energy and even their money so that this thing would exist. And then there's groups of people that join that story all along the way. And here's what I want you to know. That if you're considering being a part of Grace, we're inviting you to enter into that story of sacrifice. That we don't just receive. We are blessed to be a blessing. We are given to so that we can give back. We want to not just have the light to hoard it, we have the light to shine it. And you are invited into that. Guys, I'm just telling you. Somebody asked me, Ryan, what do you think the church is going to be like in 5 years? I'm like, do you know what it was like 5 years ago? It's almost impossible to imagine what God could do in another 5 years. I have seen so many lives change in this little window of time, and I've seen God do things that are beyond my imagination. The question starts to be, what could God do in the next chapter? right? We have 1 year left of this here to there vision that we opened. But here's what I want to do. I want to invite you in a very real and practical way to join into this, and to not just our campus, but to all of Grace Church, all of the 9 campuses. We're all jumping into this call to prayer, and it actually begins tomorrow. If you would look and say, I want to be in on this in some way. I want to be a part of a kind of story like you're telling today. Would you jump in a real practical way? And here's how you can do it. It's 3 Mondays in a row, and you can access this prayer time either at 6 a.m., noon, or 8:30, right? Some of those times are going to make sense to you. Some of you are like, nope, not doing that one, right? And that's fine, right? But if you would look and say, hey, I could do a noon, I'm a morning person. I could do a 6 a.m. I could jump onto a Zoom call or at 8:30 at night after I put the kids to bed. And here's the thing. I know you're wondering. Don't worry. No one's going to ask you to pray and see you and be like, why don't you pray out loud, right? It's what we're all terrified about. That's not going to happen. In fact, you can just turn your camera off if you want to. You don't have to say a word. You can just show up, right? In agreement, be with everybody else. And you're going to be with people all over Northeast Ohio, people in South Carolina, people in Georgia, right? You're people all over the place that are going to be a part of this call to prayer. And this is not just for our campus, but it's that God would move in powerful ways in all of these areas and beyond, that God would move to start 30 churches in 30 years, and that we're going to be a part of that. Did you know that it's very likely that we will have the privilege of starting a new church, a new campus out of this church one day? That not only will we impact this community, but other communities beyond us. Do you see how impactful this thing is? Guys, this is changing lives in communities. We get to be in on it. Right? This isn't just, I'm going to church again, Sunday morning. This is a movement that is altering people's hearts, minds, and lives. And you say, Ryan, is it really that simple that we can engage through prayer and God? I don't know why God chose to set things up this way. He can do whatever he wants, right? He spoke the world into existence, but he looks and says, I want you to ask. I want you to knock. I want you to seek. And part of what God does in prayer is he wants our hearts to align with his heart. I want you to participate in the asking. Part of it, I think, is so that when we see it happen, it increases our faith, and we get to start to see God moving and know, man, I got to be a part of that. I got to be in on that. I got to be part of lighting the candle and being a part of what God's doing. So here's what I'd love for you to do. I'd love for you to sign up for this today. To sign up and be a part of this however you want. It could be one shift out of these, whatever it is, 9 that are available. Or you might go to every single one of them. But join the story of sacrifice. Be a part of it, right? So that in the years to come, we can look back and say, we remember. We remember how God moved and how he worked and how he led. And we got to have a small part to play in the big story of God's movement. Guys, today, all I want us to do, right? If you can pray, that you can sign up for, that's great. Really, where I want us to land today is in a place of celebration. To look back and to say, God, thank you. Thanks that I have a church to gather in. Thanks that I have a place, a movement to be a part of where the community is being impacted. Thank you, God, that you have done this work and that I get to be in on it. I want us to land there. Next week, we'll talk about pieces that are going to open up, opportunities that are being made available to us. Today, we just stop and celebrate. We just say thank you. We praise and we worship together. I'm going to pray. The band's going to come out. Bow our heads and close our eyes, and we can sing and worship together. Lord, today, we just want to confess that all honor and all glory and all praise is due to you. God, we confess that we can't change lives. We can't make these things happen. Lord, only you can do that. And we say thank you, God, that you include us in it. You ask us to pray, and you ask us to show up, and you ask us to speak the truth, to live as the body of Christ, as the church. And somehow you've decided to work through that, to point to yourself that many might find you. God, help us today to never take it for granted how you're working in and through our lives, in our community, and how you want to continue that work in and through us. Meet us here, even now.